Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Scott Stevenson back on the show. I was just looking back at when Scott was last on, and it was actually a 177 episode, and that was 1 year ago in October last year, which I can't quite believe it's been that long because it doesn't feel that long. I don't know if it feels that long for you, Scott.
No, I was looking through those messages as well because the way they come in on my email is all as one. It's like one giant threaded discussion between the two of us. And you've done so much with the podcast since then, Steve. You've had so many. That. Yeah, like your business has grown like by leaps and bounds. So congratulations.
I appreciate people like you, Scott, who I can bring on and we can get episodes out because getting an episode out every week is like the standard for us. So it's fantastic that there's such a wealth of kind of evidence-based practitioners in the field who are, or just like great people who are great minds and coaches. So you're definitely in that group, and you've been on the podcast several times because you're a great guest to have on.
This is just part of, I can't help it. Basically, it's part of my life's mission, just to try to help as many people as I can. You know this, so You're helping me do what I want to do. So I appreciate it.
That's why I started interviewing guests, because I was like, I need to share this with more people. So I'm so glad the podcast has got to a point where I can interview someone who's maybe less known and maybe they get quite a bit more well known. So even for someone like yourself, I'm glad that it can somehow assist getting more knowledge out there. And I was actually going to say, if there's anyone who is listening who's a bit new and haven't heard Scott before, he is a doctor, he has a PhD, he is also a bodybuilder, which we're going to dig into, and also a coach of bodybuilders, and has two fantastic books. So if you haven't necessarily heard of Scott, you might have heard of Fortitude Training, which I think in the bodybuilding scene is pretty kind of very widely spread for sure. And then your kind of more recent book, which is Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, which I've no doubt, lots of the topics within that book, I don't know, they come up in probably every podcast almost that you talk to.
Yeah. It's funny. It was a few years back and I was in a gym. It was one of the gyms here locally. And I was actually overheard someone who I knew from the gym, just sort of, a gym acquaintance. And she was talking to someone about how to do muscle rounds, which is one of the set types from Fortitude Training. And I would have said anything if I didn't already know one of the people in this group. They're literally right next to me on the leg press thing next to me or something like that. And they're like, yeah, you do it like this and this and this. And I walked over and I said, that's a really cool where'd you guys come up with that? She's like, I don't know. I found it somewhere. And it was really odd to hear people talking about it. It's almost as if they're speaking to me in the third person without realizing that it was me.
Yeah.
So I've done an interesting job somehow of being like under the radar in a certain way, but then not under the radar. So I don't know how you do that, but I think there's still some of that, which is okay. I don't like the celebrity part of this, but I like the helping. So it's always kind of a catch-22. Like the more known you are, the more people will tend to look at you. And this actually is maybe something we could talk about too. But when it comes to experts, when it comes to knowledge, the people that you have on here you've had some obviously tremendous guests, but people will often take that information and they will sort of fall into the logical fallacy of argument by authority and say, oh, this is first thing he said was he's a doctor, he's a PhD. And that, in my mind, it means you should hold those people even more accountable for the things they're saying and question them even more. They should be able to back up everything they can possibly say, and then be very willing to say, of course, I don't know, too. But so yeah, it was just interesting that they had knew about the training techniques and they didn't know where they came from at the same time. So that's an important part of gaining this knowledge, is when you ask questions, you do a really good job with this, and your guests, they know, because many of them have been scientifically trained, that when you give an answer, it's best whenever possible to provide the rationale, the justification, the background information for that. And that should be the standard, I think, for dissemination of information. We're so, the cult of personality that some people have and the gimmicks and those sorts of things could just captivate us in so many ways that maybe aren't to our best, for our best good as bodybuilders, as people who are trying to follow this very rigorous pursuit sometimes. So anyway, a little off topic, which I tend to do.
I like the off topic chat is always great. It's off topic, but I mean, we don't have a topic anyway, so not exactly. No, I like that, and I think one, just the fact that kind of some of your methods and the education that you've spread is more well known than kind of you behind it says a lot about you, and the fact that also you're like, that's kind of the way I like it. I think that's probably healthier actually for you as well, kind of not having that celebrity status, and probably makes you better at disseminating knowledge and putting it out there because you haven't got the associated stress maybe behind everything else there. And also, I completely agree with kind of, you need to have a reason behind your words, which I'm so glad that's spreading, because online coaching is still, I'd say, fairly infant in how it's come out, but it is definitely growing, and more people or more clients are demanding that sort of service from a coach who can't just be like, hey, look at me, I'm huge and jacked. They kind of still like, I need to know why I'm doing this though. And if they don't have an answer, then they can't just fall back on that, I guess.
It's just because, and I've said this maybe on your podcast before, but the very nature of this endeavor, because our egos and our minds associate our physical bodies with who we are. We see ourselves as this little person, behind our mind's eye looking out, and this body is basically it is who we are, and our social constructs of ourselves makes it so that people who have tremendous physiques, and you still see this in marketing, it's throughout, it's ubiquitous throughout the fitness industry. The people who have the best physiques, who look the best, may not have gotten there by way of the knowledge of the things they're talking about. It may be just the genetics that they have, and seeing that is very, I see this guy and he uses lots of large words and he seems to make logical sense, but this other guy, like, he just looks phenomenal. I want to listen to what that guy said, like his physique. That's what I want to look like. I can't help. I'm going with this guy.
Yeah.
And it's like having I just bought a new vehicle. It's like, I was at a motorcycle dealership, and it's like going on the car dealership, and you just, a good salesperson can kind of like, they can really rope-a-dope you in. And that's the thing that I try to push as much with the Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book, is that people can do all of this on their own, in large part. Not that they necessarily need to. That may not be what they want to do, but we're not really as understanding of that this is how it was done back in the day. There was guys like Vince Guarana and then Joe Weider and some of the original quote unquote gurus, and then Chad Nichols came around, and he's obviously still doing his thing. But before then, most of the guys just, like, who was Lee Haney's coach? I don't remember did Lee Haney have a coach? I don't think he did. I think he coached himself. He was associated with the Weeders and those sorts of things. And, Corey Everson, of course, her husband, probably helped out a good bit, but there's a lot of really good physiques that came about just kind of figuring these things out and learning from it. So that can be integrated in large part, more so than they want to let you know about, like a used car dealer. And I'm not speaking poorly about all coaches. God forbid. There's tons of phenomenal, amazing people out there who just want to do the same thing I want to do and help people as much as they can. But just to know that there's so much more that you can harvest from the endeavor, from the experience of doing this. And you do this yourself, Steve. I'm like, I watched your Instagram. I like your posts. I watch your podcast. Everything you're doing here, you're actually living what I'm talking about. You're educating yourself through this podcast and taking advantage of the fact that, you've actually got this platform, which has created your own internal educational system for yourself, which is really pretty cool. But we can do this. It's totally viable. Too large, depending on the person, to a large extent. Some people will go into a car dealership and have, like, I just want the one that's not going to break down, and gets good gas mileage, and you try to trust somebody. You can't be an expert on everything. And then some people are going to go in and they're going to start, peppering the questions. Tell me about this, that, and the other. And say, well, where'd you go with this finance rate? Like, I think you can get this better down the road. And so if that's your natural inclination, that can be done in this world, despite how crazy it is. And last note on this, I'll actually refer people to just came out a couple of days ago, the last podcast that I did with Scott McNally, the Muscle Minds podcast. And I just put together like a mini tutorial on how you can dig into the research literature on your own. Just, using Google Scholar, PubMed, those sorts of things, to just find the answers to things. Cause it's almost, and I know I have an unusual perspective on this, because I've been doing this so long, I immediately I see the possibility of a question and I go after it. Like, it's like sharks looking for blood in the water. It's like, I want to find the answers, and I just keep on swimming and down the rabbit holes until I can find something that satisfies me, at least temporarily. But people will sometimes go and post. I see this on social media and discussion boards. Can you tell me any good studies about, creatine monohydrate and cramping? And they don't realize that just like you could Google for the closest Italian restaurants near your house, you can also go to Google Scholar and Google creatine monohydrate and cramping and find some really good information there very, very quickly, very, very easily, in a very understandable way. So I think that's just because social media hits us with so many things. It's just like a whirl of information. It's like a whirlwind of data flowing around us. It's hard to realize that, hey, we can just stop this. You can be Neo in the Matrix and say, stop. Okay, I want to find out about this on my own, and I can go and then eventually potentially hit a roadblock and say, okay, I don't know what they're talking about. They're talking about renal filtration and all this stuff, so I'm going to have to ask somebody. But you can get very, very close to the answers you might want. So anyway, that's available, and the podcast just came out, so people can dig into that if they like. And it's quite fun, actually. We actually just picked some topics and started digging in. I've learned some things on the podcast that I didn't know about, because I was like, oh, there's a rabbit hole. Sorry, I'm going to have to go in there. I just can't help myself. So anyway, it's all available. It's all you're capable of doing so many things that I think people don't realize. Anyway, I think you wanted to talk about monitoring today, like progress monitoring, those sorts of things.
I did at some stage. I have, I don't know if we want to dig into that. We can definitely dig into that. Something sprung to mind because I actually was going to bring this up potentially because if we had time, and I might dive into it first if you're okay to, just because I listened to, I don't know if I think I missed the one that you've just said with Scott, but I think I got one of the ones before it where you're talking about the different the squat, what was it called? What are they called? I forgot what they're called. The different squat machines. Belt squats, that's the one.
You're right.
So the reason I found that really interesting, and I was refer people to that podcast that you did with Scott rather than like getting you to talk through the entire study. But the reason I found it interesting is because of what you've kind of said there, in that people can look at studies or kind of an abstract very quickly, and they might conclude something that they shouldn't be concluding because they don't maybe understand they haven't gone into the research like you did. You kind of went through the entire study and you're like, this is what they've said, but in reality, this is what's happening and this is why this has happened, which I thought was incredible. And yeah, I thought maybe you can just speak to sometimes how that can happen where, you can't just read an abstract, like when you're doing what you've said there, and you probably go into it, I guess, with Scott, where you're not just like clicking on an abstract and going, okay, I've got the answer there. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's the quote unquote, the term abstract scientist is what, people will say, is it's someone who's just, you scan to the end, you read the conclusion, and then you say, well, this is proof of this particular concept. And it's irrefutable because it's in the scientific literature, and that makes it's a marker. Like, this is how it is. Like, we've just proved that this is the value of big G in the physics world. Gravity has this pull. That's what it is. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's one of the laws of nature. There's always context, and there's never going to be a quote unquote perfect scientific study, especially not in sort of a soft science like exercise science is, to some degree at least. So really it just sort of takes a little bit of a, it's sort of like, I'm going to go back to kind of the car analogy. It's sort of like, someone says, look at this great, and this happened to me. I'll tell a kind of a funny story. So I went to, years ago, I've had several RVs. I went to California and I picked up an RV, and I probably couldn't have known this, but the people I picked it up from were very nice older couple. They gotten a little bit too old to be driving the thing around. They kept good care of the RV, but they kept it garaged. It looked great. They hadn't really probably maintained it because they hadn't used it for a while. So as it turned out, I remember driving the RV back across from California to Arizona through the desert, and the air conditioner went out. It worked for a while, and had I known, I could have gone in and figured out, maybe this air conditioner could work. When did they fill it up with Freon the last time? But it was just too much to ask them. They couldn't give me the answer. It was a good deal anyway. But I remember driving back across, and the air conditioner went out, and my dogs were panting like crazy, looking at me like, what's going on? Why are we doing this? It was literally over 100 degrees. And then there was glue that they'd used to glue some of the plastic pieces back into place that had probably fallen apart, and the glue was not holding up under the heat. So like things were falling, like the handle for the plastic that covered the handle for the window had come off, and things were falling apart literally in front of me. And what I didn't do, which I could have done in different circumstances, was look under the hood, so to speak, and ask them questions about various things that were there. And that's what you can do with these scientific studies, is not just say, wow, that looks great. The abstract says this, that, and the other. Looks like a great RV. You know, it's got this amount of miles. It looks good. It's clean. We're good to go. But literally, you might just say, hey, can you pop the hood so I can look at the engine? And you look at, oh my gosh. You know, a bird flies out because it's been nesting in there, and the wires are all chewed through from rodents. And like, I think I know enough just in seeing this. You don't have to be a mechanic, you know, go in there with a voltmeter and pressure, temperature sensors and all sorts of things, and like do a full diagnostic on the engine to know that that wouldn't be a smart call. So that's kind of what I did with that paper. And this can be done in so many other cases too, as long as you're curious. It's really just kind of curiosity. So instead of just reading the abstract, and a lot of times the biggest step, actually, believe it or not, will be many of these studies get posted in news articles, like lay press articles related to cardiovascular disease. There was one related to growth hormone use in athletes that came out that I made a big post on Facebook about. Maybe I can send you a link and people can read that. It's a very different topic. And oh my God, it can be almost, and I've gotten better at it now, but it can be very hard to find the original research paper. They'll say a paper by, John Smith, and he's at Johns Hopkins Hospital. So you can say, okay, so you click there, you try to find him. It's like, I can't find this author. What was the name of the paper? So then you have to Google the title of the article, and it's been republished. Eventually, maybe someone's actually cited it. They do a better job of that now than 5 or 10 years ago. And then you can find the paper. And then you realize, okay, well, this reporter they're just cherry picking the information that's going to best make for readership clicks so that you can sell advertising. They're selling clicks basically to advertisers on many lay press websites. So once you've actually found the research paper itself, then you can you can download these, and that's what I show on the podcast that just came out. Many of them are free. In fact, most of the ones that kind of circulate widely on the internet tend to be free. I mentioned on that podcast, I buy several a month, $40 a piece, American dollars, just because I can't get them any other way. And I want to read them, and it's worth it for me. It's my profession. It's my hobby. So I'll pay, for a good research paper, but many of them are free. You download the PDF, and then you go and look at the methods. And for instance, in this belt squat paper, one of the big issues was they didn't really standardize the load in terms of the load that was on the person's waist wearing the belt. They standardized the load on the machines, but there's the mechanics of the machines, there's the weight of the carriages, all those other things which you talk about in that podcast that immediately would jump out to anyone who's used different belt squats.
Yeah.
Because you go and you get on so many different machines. A barbell's nice, but you go and travel, and let's say, I don't know if hammer strength is as big there in the UK. There's so many good lines that are UK specific.
Yeah, it's not huge.
Yeah, in the States, more so it is, and you'll even know the different years of hammer strength machines feel differently.
Yeah,
you can tell, and you can't if you're someone who's for instance applying progressive overload and inching forward, and you want to use a wide chest. Which one of the hammer strength standard chests, they call it the wide chest. You'll find there some are wider than others, some have a little different angle than others, and that there can be, if it's only a 3 or 5% difference, that could be 5 months worth of progress for someone who's really advanced. So you can't compare those things, and you know it right away. You can tell it's these 2 plates feel heavier than back home when I'm using 2 plates. So those sorts of things would jump out to you when you're reading a paper like this. It's well, didn't they can't just put on 45s on all these different machines and assume that it's creating the same load and then make the other assessments that they did, because they didn't standardize. That's just, you just know that intuitively as someone who's been in the gym a lot.
Yeah.
And those are the sorts of things that people, I think, aren't aware that they can do, that they know. Like it's just basically, it's sort of bro knowledge. It's not bro science, but it's bro knowledge and common sense from someone who's been in the gym applied to the method section, in this case of this paper, to say, okay, that's cool. I see what they did, but man, they could have done this, and this would have been a different comparison and probably more meaningful for me.
Yeah.
So the other examples of that are things like in the worst scenarios, it used to be like, I want to just throw out, everyone makes fun of Muscle Tech. I'm not trying to pick on muscle, but the Muscle Tech ads, and you'd see that, they'd scientific studies with a big bar graph, and the numbers would be, the bar graphs would be misrepresented because they're only showing like the top 10%. And there's a 3% difference, but it looks like 3 versus 7 or something like that. It's gigantic because of the scale they're using. And then the citations are to rodent studies or, developing myotubes in culture or something like that. It's like, okay, hold on. I'm a grown man trying to gain muscle mass training in the gym. I am not a developing murine mouse muscle cell. So that right there is a knock on this. I'm going to take the information with, a bag of salt, not just a large amount of criticism. So those sorts of things can immediately sort of tell you, is this information worthwhile? But like when you read the conclusion, the conclusion might be something like, our results suggest that creatine monohydrate doubles the rate of protein synthesis in skeletal muscle. And it's like, well, that's really kind of broad. Like actually what it should have said is in developing murine myotubes, from the cell line, which you wouldn't necessarily know if you just clipped out that one particular sentence. So sometimes the researchers will try to make more grandiose claims than what I would have had I been one of the authors, and what a layperson would probably do as well, because they will see those from their perspective. So that stuff is all things that people with curiosity and desire to learn and average intelligence, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be able to do this. You just have to dig out to find those papers. And that's why I did that podcast. And I've also got it's an older article that I wrote for Elite FTS. And I'm trying to think what the name of it is. I can send you that one as well. But I started it off and I wrote this completely facetious description of basically my pseudo bogus version of sliding filament theory, how it is that actin-myosin interact for muscle contraction. And I just made up all this bullshit that sounded really, really good and scientific. And I put 3 citations, and the authors in the citations were John Meadows and Dave Tate and Skip Hill, and it was like published in the journal Irreproducible Results, those sorts of things. It was totally junk, but the type of thing that you're like, okay, it's got 3 citations, there must be good. If you don't look, you're bamboozled. They'll get you. And it sounded really good, but if you really pay close attention, it's like, okay, this is not real. So there was a little bit of an article to show people how they can see through these things. Not that scientists are trying to bamboozle people, but you are sort of bamboozled by like the amount of verbiage and the fact that this stuff just doesn't make any sense to me. But you can get a lot more than I think as I've said many times, you can get a lot more than you think you can, I think. So That's what that podcast is about. That's what part of my mission is about, is to let people know that you're smarter than you think you are.
Hey, Pascal here. I just wanted to take the moment to talk about our membership site. Inside, you'll find a thriving forum, an extensive exercise library, courses, presentations, and research reviews. All I need you to do is hit the link in the description below and sign up. See you there.
I think it's so well said. And like you said, there is so many papers now out for free, and you can even like sort by ones that are free if you want to do that. I think like in PubMed and things, and it's even down to it's great that we have people like yourself, Scott, and we have like the Mass Research Review. We have Weightology by James Krieger. Alan Aragon's been doing his for years. Like these guys disseminating all of these studies, and they're doing kind of what you just described there. And it's even to the point where you as a person might actually interpret a study differently to someone else. I know, like, obviously we recently had Eric Helms on, Mike Israetel kind of somewhat debating around like set increases through a mesocycle. And they are two kind of experts in the field with quite different opinions on the entirety of the research. So like, and I'm sure you have your own opinion on that as well, which I just find fascinating. And then as an individual, like for me, I can either just listen to them and make an opinion based off what they're saying, or I can even read the research, or at least what I have access to as well, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. And the thing, people who listen to me, and I may have said this, I feel like I'm repeating myself so much, but it's okay, is literally the Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach name of the book is sort of a play on the Be Your Own Buddha idea. And the Buddha's notion, and I'm not trying to get religion, people say Buddha isn't really religion, but the Buddha's notion was that figure it out for yourself.
Yeah.
Figure out your own truth. And there's a Zen koan that I always throw out, and one way to interpret it is the way I'll tell you, but it's the koan is something like, you see a Buddha in the road, kill him. So that means if someone comes to you and says, I'm your Buddha, I'm your guru, I'm the guy who tells you how it should be, then that is a conceptual idea that you want to erase from your consciousness. So kill that Buddha, like kill that idea, because you are literally, if you think about it, you are the penultimate decision maker as to what you believe and what you take in. So if you trust, because everything that Eric Helms has said, well, this excellent person to listen to, absolutely, there's no doubt about that. But you're the one who ultimately decides whether you favor Eric's or Mike's opinion on adding volume over the course of a mesocycle, or mine, or whether you combine three of them or multiple opinions. So you're the one who's making the call. You're your own Buddha, but when you relegate your decision-making process to someone else, you've given up your power, and you've given up, so much of what makes this whole thing fun. It's kind of like, it's like just handing off the steering wheel to someone and getting in the back seat and say, okay, drive me around. It's like, no, I want to drive. I want to like explore and figure this out. And those people can be, guides to help you find your way on those paths. So yeah, it's something that people don't realize that they can do. And it is fascinating though, how it's all comes down to interpretation to some degree. It's not like I said, it's a kind of a soft science, exercise sciences. I was a physics major when I was an undergraduate. So not that I know a heck a lot about physics, that was a long while ago, but physics is kind of a black and white. You can actually sort of prove things in physics. Like there was a particle that existed, and we have the data kind of proved this particle can't exist, to some degree. Actually, from a philosophical perspective, maybe not. But as far as we can tell, as long as we take these measurements to be accurate, it was there. Whereas you look at the soft science of exercise science, and you look at means and standard deviations, and you say that creatine monohydrate increased strength and muscle mass gains. Well, that's an average in an experimental group compared to a control group that didn't get the creatine. And then we start looking at outliers or individual data points within that. You may find that there could have been someone who didn't get any creatine who gained more muscle mass and strength than someone who did get creatine. So then you ask those two people, like, does creatine work? And they'll say, hell no, like he didn't get any creatine and he gained twice as much as I did. So that's their perspective. That's their truth, very much so. So someone might take on, let's say, Mike's perspective and try to apply that to his or her training and find that's not my truth. That doesn't work for me. I just know it. I've given it my best shot. Whereas they take on Eric's idea and they maybe add a little bit of their own flavor to it, and it works wonderfully for them. So they like, the Eric Helms flavor with their own sprinkles on it. They go and they add their own additions to the recipe for their own training. And that's what the beauty of this is like, you don't have to go and say, it's either McDonald's or Burger King. It's either Five Guys or whatever the burger place. It's like, no, you can make your own with whatever it is. And that's really going to be the best way anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
I think in many, many cases, because there is so much variability, that biological inter-individual difference notion, it's so underestimated, I think, because we want to have black and white answers. I mean, this.
Yeah.
My gosh, how many questions do you get? Like, what should I do? What's the best way? It's like, I don't have any idea. I mean, I have some idea, like, the best way to take your creatine is not to throw it over your shoulder. You probably need to consume it, but or throw it in your ear or something like that. But still, there's going to be some variations there. So someone might say, you know what, you got to take creatine with grape juice because you get that high glycemic index and the insulin and blah blah. And it's like, okay, so people start taking with grape juice, and they take it right before they work out, and they take the grape juice and they get a reactive hypoglycemia, and they end up sweating profusely and feeling awful during the workouts. And the workouts are horrible. They suffer because they've taken all this grape juice in and they didn't follow it up with an intra-workout. That's not a great way for them to take creatine, although it might sound great on paper for the various reasons that person might have noted. So there's all sorts of, that's sort of a facetious example, but there's finer delineations there that I think we're all, if we pay close attention to, we're capable of figuring out to some degree. So
I really like that. A really obvious one that springs to mind is like, it used to be said, or it's still said, you have to squat to grow your legs. Like this, you must be squatting, and it's becoming better known. That's certainly not like a mandatory exercise, but there's plenty of people, I'm sure, still trying to do it who probably shouldn't be doing it for quad hypertrophy or whatever they're trying to do if they're not a power lifter.
Yeah, I mean, I squatted for like a decade though. I mean, I gave it a good run, and I got to doing some very heavy squats, and I just got a big butt. My glutes grew great. And I literally have stage photos where, like, some of the back double bi shots, it's like, that guy's like, the glutes were just crazy, but the legs didn't match at all. And so I finally, but I gave it a good run. I think, so that's the thing, there's such a pendulum too with some of these things.
Yeah.
People will say, okay, well, you don't have to squat. Like Dorian Yates didn't squat, so I'm not squatting. It's like, well, give it a go, give it a shot. There's a reason why those sort of rules of thumb have a role to play, of course, but so give them a go, but we recognize too that what you say is very, very true, is that there are no rules, so to speak, only the ones that apply to you that you choose to follow.
Fantastic. Cool. I'm so glad we spoke about that, actually, because I think that's something, normally we end up talking about unique topics I've never touched on the podcast before. And I think that's something that is kind of fundamental in many ways to everything we speak about on the podcast. So I'm glad we spoke about that. I don't know if we want to jump to kind of monitoring progress and things, or if we want to talk about your recent endeavors and your kind of self-coaching experience to stage just recently. I don't know if you're cool to talk about that.
Let's talk about the progress first. There's probably okay. More there, more meat, so to speak. And I've got more to come in that regard. So I'll probably do a podcast on that whole topic later so I'm having some fun with that. So okay. It's still cooking, so to speak. Let's say, cool. Let's say it that way.
Awesome. So well, within Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, you have a whole chapter on kind of monitoring progress and how to track it. And I think this is something for a lot of competitors. I mean, there's many different tools we have, and I think hearing your perspective on kind of what you use at different times would be really helpful so that people have kind of some sort of method to use going forward.
Yeah. So the idea of the book, as the title says, is to be your own coach. And so often, like I just mentioned, because it's your own body, as a friend of mine used to say, I live in here. Like, I can't see this in the way that you can as an objective third person. People will hire a coach on for the quote accountability as well. I think sometimes that's just an excuse, because it can be a very, very hard thing to look at yourself objectively and to separate the psychological, maybe slightly body dysmorphic slanted perspective that like all of us have. Sorry, I didn't want to be absolute there, but to some degree, like that's just part of the nature of the pursuit. Is that your mind is going to get twisted around. And I was listening to a podcast that all kind of blur together sometimes, but I've been calling these, especially they happen during prep, for instance, body dysmorphia days. And I remember over the course of the years, I found it quite funny, because I can almost step back in a way that there's a philosopher named Eckhart Tolle who talks about being the watcher. And sometimes you go into the gym and you just, for whatever reason, maybe it's a different gym and the mirrors look different, whatever, and you look at yourself and you look like, oh my gosh, I just lost 20 pounds of muscle mass overnight. And it would freak people out, of course, initially. It's like, what's going on? So you're constantly checking the mirror and, trying to bolster your psychological mood and your perspective on like what's actually going on here. And now because I've seen this thousands of times, that it just happens. I just laugh. It's like, this is just my brain. I'm like stepping out, like watching my mind, trying to play tricks on me. And I just smile and go, it's going to be a body dysmorphia day. It's going to be one of those days when I'm looking small. And that's why it's nice to have something else that's more objective, less subjective, to follow along and gauge your progress. A coach can do that. A third person can do that. A good friend can do that. You don't want sort of the yes men or yes women. Oh, you look great. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the best gym to be at is a gym where you're not the big fish in the pond. And I've seen that so many times, not as much now, I don't think, because social media has kind of warped us the other direction, where you're seeing all these incredible physiques. So you're constantly reminded of how paltry yours is, relative to the IFBB pros who have hundreds of thousands of followers. But if you're the big guy or the lean guy or the most advanced person in your gym, or one of the only competitors, you look so much above everyone else, it'd be easy to lose perspective. So there's all of these various psychological potential hurdles and inputs coming in that can throw off your perspective and sort of keep you off the trail of where you're trying to go, either during the off season or pre-contest. So we can apply a little science there. Consistency and science, I just came up with that, but that's sort of, I think, the two major themes that can come from these. So one is consistency in your monitoring and of all the things that could be related to your body composition, your muscle mass, and body fat. So if you're going to use, for instance, strength measures in the gym, and I think if we take the notion, which I hope to see more represented in the research literature, as regards to increases in something that will predict increases or changes in muscle mass. If we take the notion of form will follow function, meaning that there is something to say for this notion of progressive overload, in that the manifestation of muscle hypertrophy reflects an adaptation in the performance capabilities of the musculature of the nervous system, and ideally for bodybuilders, mainly the musculature. You've been training long enough that, and this comes back to this idea of consistency, where you can consistently use the same exercises under consistent circumstances. When you go on a Monday after a rest day beforehand, where your diet's been the same, and find that performance improvements, reps with a given weight, are going up, that would tell you that strength's going up, or hypertrophy range rep strength is going up, and that's reflective of muscle mass. So, for instance, I always say you start a prep, let's say you can do 200 pounds for 10 reps, and you're maybe doing more volume because your recovery isn't there. And under those same circumstances, with that same machine or that same barbell, same day of the week, the same recovery, everything else, if you're able to do 200 pounds for 8 reps still, chances are, if it's an exercise you've been doing for a while and you're doing all those things to keep the testing conditions consistent, as a good scientist would, you've held on to your muscle mass pretty well. Now, you may feel very, very different, but if this is like your all out PR, what can I do, after a proper warm up, conditions that are standardized the best you possibly can do that, you might not be able to do very many more sets thereafter because you've been eating a low carb diet and your glycogen levels have gone down. So your workouts you may not be able to replicate the same training sessions when you're 30 pounds heavier at the beginning of a prep and you're fully fed and you're happy, et cetera, et cetera. But if you can still grind out with good form, of course, performance that's equivalent, then chances are you've held on to a lot of that muscle mass, and you're going to be able to at least maintain what I think is the most important aspect of the stimulus to keep the muscle mass, and that's the relatively heavy loading or those all-out max effort sets where you're literally going to 1 or 0 reps in reserve, like those sorts of things. Like glycogen levels are lower, you're just not going to be able to reproduce multiple set efforts. It's just not going to happen. It's just a limitation in fuel. Mm-hmm. But if your car can still go 0 to 60 in 5 seconds, that's good. Even though if the gas tank's half as full, you're not going to be able to do that nearly as many times. Kind of what's going on with glycogen levels. So that, for instance, is one major way of looking at muscle mass in terms of holding on to it and progressing as well. So, and also driving your training. The way, and this is the topic, this touches on the topic of volume and training, is if someone were, for instance, going through the course of an off season, I'm not trying to like open a can of worms here, and they've added volume over the course of that off season, and they're not sure, maybe they're unsure of how much muscle mass they've gained. Let's say they've got no other measurement, and they started off that period of off season growth able to do 200 pounds for, let's say, 12 reps or 15 reps. Maybe they're doing a higher rep ranges because they're doing a higher volume type of program for that reason. Say it's 10, whatever it may be. They got a standardized best effort, and they've gone over the course of 6-9 months, and that best effort performance has not gone up. And pick the rep range. It may have to be in a higher rep range if someone's doing higher rep ranges. This is the big research question that I have is there are some data suggesting that heavier loading strength and 1 rep max strength is predictive of muscle mass gain. A really nice study in rugby players. There's some little bit of data, not as much as you would like. I would love to see much more, but all those high rep, 30% of 1 rep max, 30 rep sets, I would love to see someone just correlate the increases in load in those high rep ranges over the course of the training period with the gains in muscle mass. Does form, muscle size, follow function, adaptation in terms of performance in the high rep range? The data are there. People are monitoring the progress. You can read the method sections. They're upping the weight, over the course of the weeks. And are the people who grow the best, are those the ones who move up the most in terms of the loads they're using? I'd love to see that, because I think that makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. And that would be a very strong piece of evidence suggests that form does follow function, and that that the hypertrophy, which some people have suggested, is sort of kind of a secondary aspect of the adaptation, because the nervous system really accounts for so much of the muscle growth, muscle strength, performance increments. So anyway, over the course of an off season, when you're growing, you'd want that highest performance to go up. Let's say that it goes down. Let's say that you're able to somehow like knuckle through high volume training, just as an example, or it could be whatever training approach, you're higher frequency, or maybe you got a new job and you're not getting better in the gym in some way, shape, or form. It's possible that you may have changed your form. You got a better mind-muscle connection. There's some other things that could have come into play. But generally speaking, you'd want to see that under those controlled circumstances. So that's a huge one right there, I think. So that's, do you have any questions on that before there's another, that's a kind of a big topic.
Hi guys, Steve here. Just wanted to take a moment of your time to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we pride ourselves on providing personalized service that will take your physique and knowledge to the next level. If you're interested, check the description and sign up. Yeah, I think it's, from my understanding, especially from people like yourself who are kind of the guys who are focusing on hypertrophy within kind of the evidence and the science, they all seem to agree that form follows function. Like a bigger muscle should be a stronger muscle. And if you're not getting stronger over the long term, all things being equal, probably something's a little bit off with your training, whether or not it's too high a volume, too little volume, that sort of thing. And the only additional thing I remember talking to James Krieger about was he's quite a fan of kind of multiple set performance on like isolation lifts, because it kind of removes the neurological adaptations, and it's kind of, he likes the kind of a multiple set approach to take into account the fact that volume seems to be important.
Yeah, and that, I mean, this is a contentious topic. To a whole podcast on this as well, with the idea of sarcoplasmic hypertrophy.
Yeah.
And if that is representative of enzymatic adaptations. We know, like, literally within some of Andy Fry's work from many, many years ago, you start seeing shifts in myosin isoforms, like right off the bat. A single training session, a couple training sessions will start to shift the expression of metabolic enzymes and myosin to allow for better performance. So if some of that quote unquote sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, which some people may experience, some people don't, that particular, the Cody Hahn study was an interesting one because they just took the people who grew and threw away those who didn't. So that was a very biased way to look at it, but it's good to do that. Pull out the information that seems relevant and then dissect it. So did that. It could be that, a multiple set approach where you're basically gaining in muscle endurance to some degree could be representative of muscle growth by way of sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, if that's coming from the non-myofibrillar component of the muscle cell volume. So you should be seeing those things. Like something should be, and that would be a standardized thing. You really wouldn't be able to compare that so much, I wouldn't think, over the course of a pre-contest period when your glycogen levels are getting low, because then you don't have the fuel there. You're trying to say, like, what's the how far can you go in this car with a full tank versus a half a tank? It's like, obviously the full tank's going to do better because you don't have the fuel otherwise. So there's that.
One more question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just
please.
on that. It was kind of the pre-contest and like in contest prep. Do you ever take into consideration the body weight change of the person and whether or not that impacts the lift? Because I'm sure, it has an impact.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, like squatting, those sorts of things, it can be it's actually just kind of crossed my mind today, think about what we might talk about. There's also something like, and I haven't seen this studied all that well, but it's a phenomenon that's really evident sort of in the reverse when someone has rebounded maybe excessively post-contest. This idea, what powerlifters call interstitial leverage.
Yeah.
Heard that term before? Yeah. So, I mean, I sort of think of that as basically the hydration state. It's in the interstitium, in the muscle. The organ itself of each muscle is actually an organ of the muscular system, like technically. And you've got those series and parallel elastic components where literally you're going to be able to get more force production, especially if you tend to be sort of ballistic in your training, or you throw a little body English in there, or just simply you're just going to have more tension in those elastic components because you've got so much fluid compared to let's say someone has just a really nasty rebound. They're like 7 days and they're up 20 or 30 pounds, something like that. You'll hear stories, and I've seen this before. Guys, they go in and they're like, they feel great. They're eating, their neurotransmitters are back online, their sex drive's back to go. They're doing wonderful. They want to go in the gym. They train like animals, and they tear things.
Right.
They produce so much force, and you get so much stronger. So hydration state, and that does have an impact on muscular performance. You can see that in studies of isolated muscle. You don't want to be dehydrated, that's for sure. And hydration state also has an impact on muscle anabolic anabolism. So muscle protein synthesis is a function of cellular hydration. You see that in that's one of the things that you can actually, if you prevent in isolated cells the cell from increasing in its volume, you can antagonize some of insulin's anabolic effects or anti-catabolic effects. So a shrunken cell, it tends to be more catabolic, and a large cell tends to be more anabolic, generally speaking. I've seen that done in like liver cells. Hoysinger is the name everyone always cites when they look at that, and waiting for them to do it more of that research in skeletal muscle. That's one of the things that creatine might potentially do.
The cell swelling.
Volumizing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's something to say for both the body weight, and that, like, let's say, if you're especially, let's say you're doing like a lunge or a Romanian split squat, something like that, and you've gone from let's say 220 pounds to 180 pounds. You've lost a lot of weight. So and you're moving most of that body weight with one leg now. So now you've got, let's say, 30 pounds difference, and you're much lighter as you dieted down. You're going to be able to pick up heavier loads just by virtue of having lost that quote unquote dead weight, even if it's muscle mass or fat. Either way, it's not doing much except allowing you to hold the load if that one leg is driving the vertical movement of the lift up and down. And then there's the hydration and this interstitial leverage potential idea. And then, of course, just how you're going to feel. to some degree. So nervous system excitability, but yeah, there's just the mechanical idea of how much you weigh. And you can see this, for instance, like on a leg press sometimes too, depending on how you do them. A lot of guys will come down and you see the knees will come into the midsection.
Right.
And if
Yeah.
you got a little bit of a food baby in there, and maybe that's where your body fat is held. Like that's a springboard for moving loads around, and then you get leaner and that's not there anymore. You can't bounce off the food baby.
Yeah.
So you don't have a food trampoline for moving the weight on the leg press. So all those things can combine, and that's why doing these sort of standardizing the form, the range of motion, the tempo as well can play a huge role here. So we don't have sort of a stretch shortening cycle that's taking advantage of that interstitial leverage notion. That's why that's important if you're going to look at performance in the gym and compare that as a before and after weight gain or weight loss as a way to sort of estimate how much muscle you lost or gained. So, and you can sort of, someone who's seasoned, it's not that you can sort of get an idea. It's like, this is about, if you've done enough preps, you say, I'm going to typically lose, I'm expecting to be a little bit weaker.
Yeah.
But this prep, oh my God, my strength is in the absolute shitter. I need to figure out how to do a refeed here. I need to do, sort of a deload or something, because this is too much. Versus sometimes many people will adjust their volume downward. That's the way I typically suggest people do. Keep the efforts, rest intervals maybe longer, and the loads as high as possible, as long as you're not getting down to doing singles and doubles and triples during prep. And actually gain performance in those all-out sets, or those really the quote-unquote working sets over the course of a prep. Even folks who are natty, if they manage all those things really, really well. So, but yeah, that's a good question on the body weight. It does play a role for a variety of reasons, depending on the exercise. And as James said, like it's not going to be as much of a role in a biceps curl.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why that's nice. And for that reason as well. So
yeah, I think like you said there, it's kind of a lot of people who have dieted before kind of have expectations of what they to see, and they know certain lifts start feeling a bit different. I know people have like gain range of motion, like you said, they lose the belly and they can just like sink into things a little bit deeper. So right. I think that's why it's important. I guess you don't just use just performance maybe, or it's a big one for sure, but then we can have some other ones that you're also looking at, which you can, I don't know what one you want to move on to, like obviously there's, you can go.
I will add something though, one of the things that you don't see as much, but I think this is I'm going to kind of go back in history to give my best guess as to why people would do this, and why it was sort of the thought is that people would say, well, you don't have that strength as you get deeper into prep, so just go to higher reps. And sometimes people like, so you can burn the fat off, and you're not, even if you produce a giant epoch, that's debatable. I've talked about epoch could be pretty substantial after a weight training session, but a lot of those sessions are not really high volume. They're just brutal. The ones that I've seen where they produce the high epochs are just brutal sessions. Like, sets of 10 to failure, 9 or 12 sets with squats and bench press and cleans, those sorts of things. So that'll produce a crazy epoch, like hundreds and hundreds of calories. But the idea that people would then say, well, my strength's not so high, I'm going to shift and go to lighter weights, more reps in reserve, to use today's sort of nomenclature. So don't take your sets to failure, and try to accommodate the loss of strength and the fact that you don't feel like training is hard by doing more volume and just going for a pump. I think that's, for various reasons, kind of the wrong way to go for many people. Thinking you're just going to burn fat that way, thinking you can make up for effort and taking sets very close to that 0 reps in reserve or to muscular failure by doing more sets that are easier, doesn't work out. That's not, I always say, dance with the one who brung you. And the one who brung you is the big, heavy stuff. Then keep as much of that in place as you possibly can. Keep those loads high. If you keep the reps high with the heavy loads on those big lifts, even if the volume is less, you're going to keep the muscle mass really, really well. I think that's what I've seen, like in the I don't know, 40 years I've been doing this. So very important.
Yeah, I think it is. Sorry, I definitely see that. And I hope it's a bit of an old school thought that kind of, the higher rep burns the muscle in like short rest periods. And like you see people doing it, leaving, like they do these circuit training or something and leave all the reps in reserve. And I think, like you said, I kind of use, I don't know if who came up with this, kind of like what built the muscle is going to keep the muscle. That kind of like you want to train as if you're trying to grow, but you can't do as much because you haven't got the reserves.
And I think back in the day, like in Arnold's day, those guys, and obviously drugs play a huge role nowadays, just for various, it's a whole other topic too, but those guys would completely come off. Like you see pictures of Arnold and videos, and like one of my favorites, he did an ad for some vacation spot down in South America, and he's like, you got these women hang out, he's like at a bar or something like that, and just looks like an average guy, but he would just transform. So that's what a lot of those guys would do. So for them, and I think this is actually explains sort of the linear periodization model that you see coming from the Eastern Bloc of doing hypertrophy, strength, and power, where they'd start off from an off season, literally of doing nothing but kind of active recovery and letting their hormonal systems clean out, to adding in the gear. And back to bodybuilders now, those guys might start their training clean and then add in gear, and then they would actually recomp over the course, which is a really rare thing. They would actually gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. So they could actually still make progress because of the pharmaceutical assistance that they had, but that's a very contextual circumstance where they were totally off and they added it in, and they were gaining literally just fitness and getting back in the groove of doing things again while those compounds were aiding. So they're going to grow no matter what they did to some degree. It's sort of like a newbie, in a certain regard. And probably with them, adding the volume would indeed increase the amount of caloric expenditure. They couldn't have done that. They couldn't have been doing 20 or 25 sets per workout like they would do in Arnold's bodybuilding of encyclopedia, the high volume, Weider style approach. Just couldn't do that. You just be so ridiculously sore if you try to jump right into that after just hanging out on the beach and eating barbecue for months on end before starting your real kind of off season, beginning of the pre-contest type of thing. So that was, I think, those notions kind of hang. We look to the best competitors in the world for how they do it. And I think that's why that idea was at least around for a while. I think now it doesn't really apply because people aren't really doing those sorts of things pharmaceutical wise. It doesn't really apply to the lifestyle of most bodybuilders. But so that, I think, hopefully that gains some insight. That's my best guess as to why that notion one of the reasons why that notion might be around. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, I don't know, you see the people that kind of high intensity interval training and they try and incorporate it with resistance training, less in the bodybuilding kind of circuits. I think it's more just like Gen Pop, and they try and do all of that sort of thing, and it becomes appealing because of the epoch kind of maybe a bit misinterpreted of how great that can be. But I don't know if you want to move on to girth measurements or something along those lines, body weight, that sort of thing. So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries,
our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
the exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy. We're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge. And I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.